They put Frankie Doyle in the dunk tank as a joke, and I bought every ball in the bucket so that no one could throw a single one. I want to be honest about how it started, because I've told this story enough times now that people assume I planned it, that I walked onto that fairground like some kind of decent man with a decent plan, and that isn't what happened. What happened is I was there to shoe horses. That's all. I had grit under my nails and a leather apron gone black at the belly, and I'd just finished the near hind on the fair board's second draft horse when I heard the crowd start to make the sound a crowd makes when it has decided that somebody is about to be humiliated for its entertainment. My name is Wyatt Holleran. I was 29 years old that August, and I am a farrier. I shoe horses, which means I run a one-man forge out of a converted feed barn on the Cutright Road, and I drive to the stables and the fairgrounds around Hallam County with a truck full of iron and a coal fire I keep banked in a portable forge in the bed. It is not a glamorous trade. Most people my age have never met one of us, and half of them think I'm a blacksmith, which is a little like calling a dentist a butcher because both of them are near a mouth. I'm not bitter about the misunderstanding. I'm not bitter about much. I was engaged once to a woman named Nora, who I loved the honest way you love someone at 25. And she got into a good veterinary program out west and found out she wanted a bright clinic in a city with valet parking and a life with more lights in it. And I found out I wanted a coal fire and a quiet county and a barn with the door open to the weather. There's no villain in that. We just turned out to be two roads that ran parallel and never crossed again, and I drove home from the airport the last time and shod 4 horses before dark because my hands needed something true to do. I'm not bitter. I'm just tired in the specific way of a young man who did all his growing up in one hard year and came out the other side steady and a little too quiet for people his own age. So, the dunk tank. The Hallam County Fair runs the 3rd week of August, rain or shine. And it mostly rains, because we sit down in a green fold of the Cumberland foothills where the weather comes over the ridge in the afternoon and sits on us like a wet dog. The fair board runs a volunteer fundraiser every year, and that year the big draw was a dunk tank they'd rented from a party company 2 counties over, a tall glass and steel box of water with a seat on a hinged plank and a red target you hit to drop whoever's sitting up there into the tank. Usually they put the high school football coach in it, or the young preacher, somebody who'd take a soaking with a grin and sell some tickets. Good, clean fun. I'd walked past it twice that morning without a thought. But that year, somebody on the committee, and I have a strong idea who, a woman named Carla Pruitt, who wears a fairboard polo like a general's stars and has a laugh you could sand a floor with, had decided the draw would be Frankie Doyle. And they'd made a sign. That's the part I still can't get all the way past. Somebody had taken the time to letter a sign, big red letters on white poster board, and it said Dunk Sour Frankie, and under that, smaller, your chance to wipe the scowl off. And there was a line. There was a real line, 20 deep, men mostly, some of them holding beers at 11 in the morning, all of them grinning that particular grin a crowd wears when it has permission to be cruel to somebody it has already decided deserves it. I need to tell you who Frankie Doyle was to that town, because the sign only makes sense if you know. Frankie ran the counter at the Hen House, which is the little diner built into the long end of the fair's exhibition hall. A 15-stool lunch counter with a flat-top griddle and a coffee urn and a pie case, open all year for the stock sales and the 4-H meetings and the men who fix the grandstand, not just Fair Week. She'd cooked there as long as anybody could remember. And the whole county had agreed, somewhere along the way, on a story about her, that she was mean. Sour Frankie. The cook who never smiled, who'd take your order without looking up, who'd tell you the biscuits were gone in a voice that dared you to argue, who lived alone in a rented house on the edge of town and never came to a single thing. Not the fireworks, not the church picnics, not the fare she cooked at every August of her life. A big woman, broad-shouldered and heavy through the arms in the way of someone who has hefted full stockpots for 20 years, with dark hair she kept scraped back under a paper cap and a face that had decided, long before I ever met her, to give nobody the satisfaction of watching it change. That was the woman they'd put a target over. That was the scowl they'd sold tickets to wipe off. I came around the end of the livestock barn, wiping my hands on a rag, and I saw her up there on the plank in a henhouse apron gone dark at the front, 31 years old and sitting very straight over a tank of green fair water, not gripping the rail, not making a face, not begging the crowd for anything, just sitting. The way you'd sit if you'd decided that flinching was the one thing you would not give them, and you'd decided it a long time ago, and you were good at it now. She had her chin level and her eyes fixed on the middle distance, and a man in a camo cap was winding up to throw, and the crowd was doing the thing. I know the thing. I've watched rooms my whole life, the way a farrier watches a horse. You learn to read the ears and the weight shift. You learn when something's about to move before it moves. and a crowd about to enjoy a cruelty has a lean to it, a gather. That little collective tilt forward, phones coming up, somebody laughing before anything's funny because the anticipation is the funny part. I felt it go through those 20 people like weather changing, and I felt something in me go very cold and very calm at the same time, which is the way I feel right before I do a hard thing with a bad-tempered animal. I don't remember deciding. I remember walking. The kid running the dunk tank was maybe 14, a 4-H boy named Tyler with a fistful of dollar bills and a plastic bucket of the softball-sized throwing balls at his feet, and he was having the time of his life. I stepped in front of the man in the camo cap, didn't shove him, just put my body between him and the throwing line, which when you're built like a farrier is its own kind of sentence, and I looked down into that bucket, and I said to Tyler, "How much for a throw?" "$1 a ball," Tyler said. "3 for 2. "How many you got in the bucket?" He looked. "I dunno. Like, a bunch." "Count of what's in that bucket," I said, "and whatever's on the table. All of them. What do I owe you for every ball you've got?" The line went quiet in pieces, front to back, the way a wave goes out. Tyler counted, moving his lips, and came up with something like 40, and I did the math out loud so the crowd could hear it. 40 balls, $1 a ball. That's $40, and here's 50. Keep the 10 for the fare. And I took out my wallet with hands still gray from the forge, and I paid that boy $50 for every throwing ball he owned, and I picked up the bucket. The camo cap man said, "Hey, now." I was up, and a couple of the others made a noise. Then here is where I'll tell you what the crowd expected, because the whole thing turns on it. They expected a show. They'd shifted from expecting one cruelty to expecting another, better one. The big quiet farrier who'd bought all the balls. "Oh, this'll be good. He's going to soak her 40 times. He's going to make an event of it. He's going to stand there and drop Sour Frankie into that tank over and over until the whole midway comes to watch." You could see them rebuy their tickets in their heads. The lean got worse. Somebody actually said, "Oh, he's going to dunk her good." I walked to the throwing line with the bucket of 40 balls. Then I set it down. I took the balls out one at a time, and I set each one on the plank rail of the throwing table in a neat row, the way I set out horseshoe nails before a shoeing, deliberate, unhurried, 40 soft yellow balls lined up in the sun, and I did not throw a single one. I put the last one down. I straightened up, and I looked up at Frankie Doyle, who was staring at me now, up on her plank, with an expression I hadn't seen on her in the year I'd been eating at her counter, which was the expression of a person who does not know what is about to happen to her, and has therefore, for 1 second, forgotten to be armored. "Ma'am," I said, loud enough for the whole leaning crowd, "there's not going to be a show today. I bought them all so nobody else can either." Then I pulled off my forge jacket, the heavy canvas one, still warm from the fire, and I held it up open toward the tank, and I said, "It's about to rain and that water's cold. Come on down out of there. I'll walk you back to your counter." I want to describe the silence that followed, because I've never been in one like it before or since. It wasn't the silence of a crowd that's disappointed. It was the silence of a crowd that has just watched itself in a mirror it didn't ask for. 20 people who'd come to enjoy something cruel had just watched a man decline, in public, in the plainest possible language, to be cruel, and had realized, all at once and without anybody saying it, that the cruelty had been theirs the whole time, and that they'd needed a farrier to point it out by refusing to join in. You could feel the shame move through them. The camo cap man set down the beer. He wasn't going to throw anymore. Somebody at the back of the line just quietly left. Frankie didn't move for a second. Then she reached up and hit the release lever on her own plank, reached up and dumped herself into the tank, on purpose, before I could climb up and hand her down, because Frankie Doyle was not about to be handed anywhere by anybody, and she came up out of that green water streaming and furious and dignified all at once, hauled herself over the side of the tank while I held the rail, and stood dripping, on the trampled grass in front of 40 yellow balls and a whole quiet midway. She looked at my jacket, held open. She looked at me. "I don't need rescuing," she said. Water ran off her chin. Her voice was flat and low, and it did not shake. "No, ma'am," I said. "I can see that. I need somebody to walk with so I don't look like a fool standing here holding a coat. You'd be doing me the favor." She looked at me a beat longer than that line deserved. Then she took the jacket, didn't let me put it on her, took it out of my hands herself and pulled it around her own shoulders, which I have since learned is the only way Frankie Doyle will ever accept anything, by taking it. And she said, "Your funeral," and she walked. And I walked beside her, and the crowd parted like we were carrying something they were afraid to touch. And that is how I met her. That is how it started, not with a plan, with 40 balls I never threw. I kept one. I want to say that now, up front, because it matters later, and I don't want it to look like magic when it comes back. When I bent to gather the balls back into the bucket to return to Tyler, a farrier doesn't leave a mess on a fairground. That's somebody's footing. I found one had rolled under the throwing table, and I picked it up, and it was in my apron pocket, and I just never put it back. A soft, yellow softball with a little grin of red stitching. I put it on the windowsill over my forge that night, and it sat there. I didn't think about why. Some things you keep before you know they're keepings. The hen house was empty when we got there. Everybody's still out at the midway, and Frankie went behind her counter dripping and put the coffee urn on like it was any other Tuesday. I sat down on a stool. I didn't ask if I could. I've learned since that asking Frankie for permission to do a kind thing is how you get told no. You just do the small, true thing and let her decide whether to throw you out. She didn't throw me out. She stood behind her counter in my forge jacket and her soaked apron, and she looked at me for a while, drying her hands on a towel over and over past the point they were dry. "Why'd you do that?" she finally said, not soft, an interrogation. "Because they made a sign," I said. She stopped drying her hands. "I've been eating at this counter about a year," I said, "since I took over the shoeing contract for the fair board. And in a year, I've watched this whole county walk in that door and be short with you. And I've watched you feed every one of them the best plate of eggs in 3 counties without one of them saying thank you. And this morning, somebody made a sign about wiping the scowl off your face, and I decided I wasn't going to stand there and let them charge admission for it. I turned my coffee cup a quarter turn on the counter, which is a thing I do. That's the whole reason. There's no better one. Don't go looking for one." Frankie Doyle set 2 mugs on the counter. I notice the mugs because I notice things. It's the same eye that tells you a horse is favoring a foot before he limps. You just pointed at everything for the rest of your life. Hers was a heavy diner mug, thick white restaurant china gone tan on the inside from 10,000 pots, with a chip out of the rim near the handle and hen house stamped on the side in green letters worn down to ghosts. That was her mug. You could tell by the way her hand knew it. And the one she pushed across to me was a different animal entirely, a cheap souvenir mug, thinner, with a cartoon horse on the side under an arch of letters that said Bluegrass Stockyards, and, below that, were the Commonwealth trades, the kind of mug they hand out free at a livestock auction and you keep in a truck for years. They did not match. They didn't come within a mile of matching. One was a working mug that had earned its chip, and one was a giveaway from a horse sale, and she filled them both and slid me the horse. "That one's the loaner," she said. "Don't get attached, and you're paying for the coffee." "Yes, ma'am, Frankie Wyatt," I said, and she nodded once like she was filing it, and turned around to the flat top, and that was the first time I really looked at her griddle. I have spent my whole life with cast iron. It's most of the trade. The horseshoe is iron, the anvil is iron, the forge is iron. My hands smell like iron most nights, no matter what I scrub them with. And a flat-top griddle, the big rectangular cast slab a short-order cook lives and dies by, is just cast iron the size of a door, and you can read one the way I read a horse's foot. Hers was dying. I could see it from the stool. The surface had gone dull and gray at the edges where the seasoning had cooked off and never been rebuilt, and there was a low spot worn into the middle where 20 years of spatula had dished it, and a hot corner she was clearly working around, sliding everything to the left, because the right front had a cold, dead patch where the iron had rusted under a thin skin of grease and lost its heat. She was cooking like an angel on a griddle that was 3 winters from being scrap, and she was doing it by feel. The way somebody good does a hard thing on a tool that's failing them and never once complains, because complaining is asking, and asking is how you find out nobody's coming. "Your griddle's dying," I said. She didn't turn around. "My griddle's older than you and it'll outlast you. Right front's got a cold spot. You're sliding everything left, and the seasoning's gone at the corners. That's why your eggs stick on the far side and you flip them early to hide it." Now she turned around, and she looked at me with an expression I'd get to know well, which was the look of a proud person discovering that they have been seen more clearly than they arranged to be. "You watch a lot of eggs for a horseman," she said. "It's cast iron," I said. "It's the same iron. I could bring it back, re-season the whole slab, build the seasoning back up in layers, burn out that cold patch and re-temper it. Take me a few mornings, early, before you open. You wouldn't even lose a lunch. And what do I owe you for that?" "Breakfast," I said. "While I work. I get hungry early." Frankie Doyle looked at me for a long moment across her dying griddle, and I watched her run the same math I'd watch her run 100 more times before I understood what the numbers meant to her. The math of a person who has trained herself to distrust a gift, who has been handed things before that turned out to have hooks in them, who would rather do without than owe. And then she said, 6 in the morning, doors locked, knock twice, and bring your own coffee. The loaner mug stays here. And she turned back to her flat top, and that was the deal. And that was the beginning of the mornings. I started coming at 6. I'd like to pretend it was about the griddle. It was a little about the griddle, a tool that good going to ruin is a kind of vandalism, and I've never been able to walk past it. But mostly, it was that for 1 hour every morning, in the gray before the fairground woke up, I got to be in a warm room that smelled like coffee and hot iron next to a woman who talked to me like I was worth the trouble of an argument, and who never once, in all those mornings, smiled at me, and who I found I would drive a long way to not be smiled at by. The reseasoning took 11 mornings. I scraped the old surface down to raw gray iron with a pumice stone and a lot of patience, and I burned the cold patch clean with a torch and re-tempered it. And then I built the seasoning back the way you do. Thin coat of oil, high heat, let it polymerize black, over and over, layer on layer, until that slab of iron came back up glossy and dark as a beetle's back and threw heat even edge to edge for the first time in years. And every morning while I worked, Frankie cooked me breakfast on the good end of the griddle, and every morning she cooked it in a skillet. Not on the flat top, in a skillet. This is the second thing I need you to remember. She kept a small cast iron skillet, an old one, an 8-inch, worn smooth as glass on the inside and black as a night with no moon, with a little pour spout worn into one side and the letters barely legible on the bottom where a foundry name had almost rubbed away, and she cooked my eggs in that skillet, on a side burner, separate from everything else on the line. The first morning I asked her why she didn't just use the griddle I was standing right there fixing. "Because this was my mama's," she said, "and it does eggs right, and the griddle's got 200 people's grease in it, and this has got 50 years of exactly what I put in it and nothing else." She tipped a perfect over-easy onto my plate, edges lace crisp, yolk trembling and whole. There's a difference between a thing everybody's touched and a thing that's only ever been yours. You learn it or you don't. I ate the best egg of my life off a woman's dead grandmother's skillet at 6:40 in the morning, and I thought, not for the first or the last time, that Frankie Doyle said things over a stove that other people would need a whole church to say. The griddle came back to life, and I ran out of reasons to be there at 6, so I invented new ones. This is a thing I'm not proud of and told myself lies about for weeks. I started taking every meal at that counter. Breakfast before the barns, lunch when I broke from shoeing, and more than once supper, driving back to the fairground in the evening for a plate of whatever she'd made past need, because Frankie cooked past need. Always. That's a thing I noticed early and didn't understand till later. She'd make a pot roast big enough for a wedding on a slow Tuesday. She'd bake 6 pies when the case would hold 4. It read, to a town that had decided she was mean, as show-off, as waste, as a woman feeding herself into that size everybody muttered about. I ate at that counter for months before I understood I was watching evidence. Then the tin lunch started. It went like this. I'd finish breakfast and stand to pay, and there'd be a beat-up tin lunch pail on the counter by my hat, an old lardkin lunch pail, dented, with a lid that clipped, and Frankie would say, not looking up from the grill, "That's yours. You'll be out at the Hargett place till dark, and there's nothing but a gas station between here and their coffee'll kill you." And inside would be a wrapped sandwich the size of a Bible and 2 hard-boiled eggs and a wedge of pie and sometimes a jar of sweet tea with the lid on so tight I'd have to open it with a farrier's grip. And when I'd try to pay for it, she'd wave the spatula and say, "It's leftovers, don't insult me." And it was never leftovers. There is no such thing as leftovers in a lunch built like a lifeboat. I'd leave money under the plate and she'd have it back in my truck door pocket by the next morning, folded, without a word. We ran that con on each other for a long time. Me trying to pay for a lunch, she wouldn't sell me. Her feeding a man she wouldn't be caught dead, admitting she was feeding. And neither of us ever said what it was, which is how you know it was the realest thing either of us had going. The town, meanwhile, told me about her. That's what small towns do to a newcomer who takes up with the wrong person. They think you don't know yet, and they hurry to inform you, out of a kindness so poisonous it thinks it's charity. Carla Prewitt cornered me at the feed store. "You know she's not right, that Frankie," she said, in the voice people use for doing you a favor. "Cold as a well. Never gave this town the time of day. And I know you're new, so you wouldn't know, but you ought to." She lowered her voice like the sacks of feed might repeat it. She burned down the old Grange Hall, years back. Grease fire, at a fish fry she was running. Whole hall went up. Beautiful old building, 100 years old. Hand-hewn beams, burned to the foundation because Frankie Doyle couldn't be bothered to watch a fryer. Almost took the Hendricks boy with it. He was in there setting chairs. Town had to hold fish fries in the church basement for 10 years while we scraped up money to build back. And you know she never gave a dime to the rebuild fund? Not one dime. And she the one who burned it. Tight as bark on a tree, that woman. So you just be careful, is all I'm saying. "You're a nice young man." And she patted my arm and left me standing in the feed store with a 50-pound sack of coal on my shoulder and a picture in my head I didn't want. I didn't believe it whole, but I didn't disbelieve it either, and I'm ashamed of that too. It sat in me. It explained things. Why the town was short with her, why she never came to anything, why she flinched at nothing because she'd already decided the worst thing anyone could say about her had been said. I chewed on it for a week, and then I did a coward's version of asking, which is to bring up the edge of a thing and hope the person walks into the middle of it for you. I was at the counter, late, the two of us alone. There was a shelf behind her register with a few odd things on it: a jar of buttons, a plastic horse a kid had left, and a piece of dark metal I'd noticed before and taken for junk. That night I looked closer and saw it wasn't junk. It was a hinge. A big old strap hinge, forged, the kind that hangs a heavy door, and it was black and blistered and warped from heat, scorched. The surface bubbled the way steel bubbles in a fire hotter than a house should ever get, and under the scorch, at the pin, there was a gleam of yellow. Brass. A brass-bushed hinge, hand-forged, cooked in a fire and kept. "That's off a good door," I said, nodding at it, careful. "Somebody made that by hand. That's forge work." Frankie followed my eyes and went still in a way I'd learned to recognize. "It's off the Grange," she said, flat. "The old hall. It's the one thing I pulled out." And then, before I could ask the thing I was circling, she turned it on me hard and fast, the way she did everything that mattered. "You've heard the story by now. Prewitt tells it to everybody who's new. Cold Frankie burned down the Grange and never paid a nickel toward the new one. It's the town's favorite thing about me. Go on and ask. Everybody asks eventually. That's how I find out what they came for." I looked at that scorched hinge with the brass gleaming under the char, and I looked at Frankie Doyle, and something in me, the same thing that reads a horse before it moves, told me the story I'd been handed didn't fit the woman standing in front of it. A woman who cooks past need, who feeds a stranger a lifeboat lunch and won't be paid, who keeps the one salvaged hinge from a fire she's supposed to have set carelessly, keeps it on a shelf where she has to look at it every single day. That's not what carelessness keeps. Carelessness throws the evidence in the river. "I didn't come to ask you anything," I said. "I came for the pie, and to bring your lunch pail back, since you'll just deny it exists." I set the tin on the counter. "The hinge is beautiful work. That's all I see when I look at it. Good iron somebody cared about." She looked at the hinge, and then at me, for a long time. "You're a strange one, Wyatt Halloran," she said finally, and it was the closest thing to soft she'd given me. Most men would have asked. "I'm not most men. I'm a farrier. We're patient. We wait for the foot to come to us." That got something out of her. Not a smile. She didn't smile, but a short exhale through the nose, the ghost of one, the first crack in a year of granite. And I drove home that night with the empty tin pail on the seat and the picture Carla had put in my head starting, quietly, to come apart at the seams. The rain drive happened in October. I'd mentioned, over breakfast, that I was headed to the big horse auction at the Bluegrass Yards 2 counties over that Saturday. I needed to look at a batch of driving horses for a client, and there'd be tack and iron worth buying, and it was an all-day thing in the rain the forecast promised. I didn't invite her. You don't invite Frankie. You leave a door open and look away from it. I said it like a complaint. All that driving alone. The coffee at those places is battery acid. Saturday morning, she was standing outside the hen house when I pulled up, in a canvas coat and rubber boots, holding a thermos and the horse auction mug, the loaner, the Bluegrass Stockyards one, which I realized then she must have gotten at that very yard some year, a giveaway she'd kept for who knew how long, and she got in my truck without a word, set the thermos in the console, put the mug in my cup holder, and said, "The coffee at those places is battery acid. Drive." It rained the whole 2 counties, the good kind, steady and gray, the wipers keeping slow time. And somewhere on that drive Frankie Doyle came a little bit loose. I don't know if it was the rain or the truck or the 2 counties of distance between her and everybody who'd already decided who she was, but she talked. She told me about her mama, whose skillet it was, who'd cooked in a coal camp up a holler that isn't on maps anymore, and taught Frankie that you can tell a person's whole character by whether they scrape a pan clean or let it soak. She told me she'd wanted to go to a real cooking school once, in Louisville, and had the money almost saved, and then didn't go. And she said, "then didn't go," in a tone that closed the subject like a drawer. And she got a look at me trying to eat a gas station honey bun one-handed while I drove and losing most of it down my shirt. And she said, "You have the manual dexterity of a man who nails iron to horses for a living." And I said, "That is exactly the manual dexterity of a man who nails iron to horses for a living." And Frankie Doyle laughed. A real one. Surprised out of her. Low and rough and cracking up in the middle like a road that hadn't been driven in a while, and she slapped a hand over her own mouth like she'd let out a secret, and then she laughed at having done that. And for about a mile, the truck was full of it, and I kept my eyes on the road and my mouth shut because I knew, the way you know weather, that if I looked at her or said one word about it, she'd put it away and never let it out again. So I just drove us through the rain with a laughing woman beside me and thought that I had not been that happy since before the airport, since before the parallel roads, and that it had cost me nothing but a honey bun and the good sense to keep my eyes forward. We spent the day at the yards. She was sharp there, in her element, called a horse's age off its teeth quicker than the auctioneer, told me which of the driving pair was sound and which was borrowing its off for. And she was right, and a couple of the old horsemen who wouldn't have crossed the street for Sour Frankie and Cutright tipped their hats to her here because here she was just a woman who knew stock. On the way out, she stopped at the giveaway table and got a new stockyard mug, the same cartoon horse, and handed it to me. "Now you've got your own," she said. "The loaner's mine. You gave it back too many times. It's spoiled." And I understood I'd been given something, and I put it in the truck door and I still have it. I would have driven that woman around in the rain for the rest of my life. I want that on the record before I tell you the next part, because the next part is where I nearly ruined it, and I don't want you thinking I didn't know what I had. The twist, because there's always a twist, isn't there, in the story of anybody a town has decided to hate, came to me sideways, in pieces, the way the true things always came at Frankie, and I put it together myself before she ever confirmed a word of it, which is maybe the only thing I did right in the whole middle of this story. It started at Tuggle's, the feed store, the one where Carla had poisoned my ear months back. Old man Tuggle was ringing up my coal and my nail rod, and there was a younger fella behind me, a tenant farmer named Roy something, tired-looking, kids in the truck, and Roy set a feed sack on the counter and said, low, embarrassed, "Mr. Tuggle, I'm short this month. Can I run a tab till the tobacco comes in?" And Tuggle didn't even look up. "You're square, Roy," he said. "Ghost got you." Roy blinked. Tuggle said, "Every Christmas somebody pays down the winter tabs. Been happening 10, 11 years now. Envelope of cash, no name, tells me which accounts. Yours was on the list. You're square. Take your feed." And Roy stood there a second like a man who's been handed a thing he can't afford to believe in, and then he took his feed and his kids and went, and I stood there with my coal, and something cold went up the back of my neck. 10, 11 years, I said. Nobody knows who? Tuggle finally looked up, and he had the face of a man who's decided to know something and never say it. "Nobody's supposed to," he said. "That's the whole point of a ghost, son. You leave it be." And he rang my coal, and I paid, and I carried it out to my truck, and I sat there in the feed store lot in the rain, and I did the math. 10, 11 years. The Grange burned 11 years back. A woman who cooks past need and won't be paid for a lunch, who never spends a dime on herself, so the town calls her cheap and mean. A woman that sighs in the same 3 aprons for a decade, driving the same rusted-out car, living in a rented house with a chair and a bed. A woman who, everybody agreed, never gave 1 nickel to the Grange Rebuild Fund. Because she wasn't giving it to the fund. She was giving it to Roy, and to the feed tabs, and I found out the rest over the next 2 weeks, once I knew where to look and what I was looking at, to the fair itself. The new bleachers 3 years back that the board found a donor for. The roof on the livestock barn. The scholarship the 4-H gave every year from an anonymous friend of the fair. I'd been shoeing horses in a fairground half built by a woman the fairground put in a dunk tank, and not one of them knew it, because she'd made sure not one of them would ever know it, because if they knew it, they'd have to change the story. And Frankie Doyle had decided a long time ago that she would rather be hated with the truth in her pocket than let anybody see her hand it over. That was the first half of it, the benefactor, the ghost. I sat with that for 2 days, and then the second half arrived, and the second half is the part that took my legs out. Because if Frankie had really burned the Grange down through her own carelessness, if she was the villain of that story, then the ghost account made a sad kind of sense. Guilt money. A woman quietly buying back a debt she owed. That would fit. That would let the town keep its story and just add a footnote. But it didn't fit. It didn't fit the hinge she kept where she had to see it. It didn't fit a woman who'd never once, in all the times I'd watched people be cruel to her over that fire, defended herself, offered a single word in her own account. because guilty people explain, guilty people minimize, and Frankie just took it flat and level like she was sitting over a tank of cold water refusing to flinch. I'd seen that exact posture before. I'd seen it on her plank. It's not the posture of somebody who's sorry. It's the posture of somebody who's covering for somebody else. I didn't want to ask her. Everybody asks eventually, she'd said. That's how I find out what they came for. And I didn't want to be one more person who came for the story. So I did the coward's brave thing. I went and found the answer somewhere she wasn't, so that when I finally did know, she couldn't accuse me of having made her hand it over. I asked old Tuggle, straight out, the one man in that county who I'd figured out knew and had chosen silence. I said, "It's her, isn't it? The ghost. It's Frankie. And she didn't set that fire." And Tuggle put both hands flat on his counter and looked at me for a long time, an old man deciding whether 11 years of keeping a woman's secret ended today. "Her brother?" he said finally, so quiet I had to lean in. "Dell. You wouldn't know him. He's been gone near 10 years, out to Ohio, cleaned himself up, works at a plant, good man now, calls his sister every Sunday. I hear." He wet his lips. But back then, he was 17 and drunk half the time and headed for prison the fast way. And the night of that fish fry, Frankie had that boy watching the fryers while she ran out for more oil. And he'd been into somebody's beer, and he knocked the whole rig over, propane and grease and all. And it went up so fast the Hendricks boy barely got out. He shook his head. Frankie sent Dell home out the back before the trucks came. Told the fire marshal she'd left the fryers unwatched. Took the whole thing on herself. That boy had 2 priors already. A fire like that, somebody nearly killed. He'd have gone away for years and come out worse. He straightened up. She was 20, and she made a choice in about 4 seconds, and she's been paying for it in 2 directions ever since. The town's hate on the one hand, and every dollar she'll ever earn on the other, buying back a hall her drunk baby brother burned down so he could grow up into a man worth the price. Tuggle straightened up. I was the fire marshal's brother-in-law. I saw the boy's face in her car. I've known 11 years. And I've watched this town call her mean and cheap and sour to her face, and I've kept my mouth shut because she asked me to. And it is the worst thing I have ever done, keeping that woman's secret, and I'd do it again, because it's hers, not mine, and it's not mine to give away. He looked at me hard. And it's not yours either, son, so you be real careful what you do with it. I wasn't careful enough. I want to tell you I handled it like a wise man. I handled it like a 29-year-old who'd just learned that the woman he was in love with, I could say the word to myself by then, in the truck, in the dark, if not to her, had been carrying a mountain up a hill by herself for 11 years while a whole county threw rocks. I didn't say a thing to her about it. That was my plan, and it was a good plan, and I lasted 4 days. Then I did the thing decent people do that ruins everything, which is I got tender. I couldn't help it. I looked at her differently across that counter. I know I did. I could feel my own face doing it. I brought her a coffee for once instead of the other way around. I carried the trash out without being asked. I said, "You don't have to do that," when she started my eggs. I let 100 small softnesses into my hands that had never been there before. I was gentle with her. And being gentle with Frankie Doyle, it turns out, was the one unforgivable thing, because a proud person who has spent 11 years making sure nobody could pity her can smell pity coming across a room like smoke, and I walked in one gray afternoon carrying it without knowing, and she smelled it, and she knew. She set down the spatula. The hen house was empty, rain on the long windows. "You know," she said, it wasn't a question. Her voice had gone all the way back to the plank, flat and level, the flinch-proof voice, the one she wore over the top of everything. "Somebody told you, Tuggle, or you sniffed around till you found it. Doesn't matter. You know, and you've been walking in here for 4 days looking at me like I'm a dog somebody kicked, and I've had about all of that I can stand." I could have lied. I'm glad I didn't. "I know about the ghost account," I said, "and I know about Dell. And I know you didn't set that fire." For a second, 1 second, something moved across her face that wasn't armor, that was almost relief, the terrible relief of a person who's carried a thing so long that being caught with it feels like being set down. And then she reached up and pulled the armor back over the top of it, deliberate, like a woman lowering a garage door, and she did the cruelest thing she knew how to do, which was to tell me the story herself, cold, in the ugliest shape it would take, so that I'd have to let go. "Let me tell it to you right. Then," she said, "since everybody's so interested in my business all of a sudden. Yes, I've been paying this town's tabs for 11 years. Not out of the goodness of my heart, out of guilt and out of spite, and because I've got nothing else to spend it on and no one to spend it with, so I might as well buy off a debt that isn't even mine. Yes, my brother knocked over the fryers. Yes, I sent him home and told the marshal I did it. You want to make me a saint out of that? Don't. It wasn't brave. It was just the only thing I could do that let me keep breathing. Because if I'd let them take Dell, I'd have had nobody. And being hated is a whole lot easier to live inside than being alone. So I picked hated. She was building it as she went. I could see her building it, laying it up cold and ugly brick by brick to wall me out. And now here you come. The nice young farrier with the sad eyes. Fixed my griddle, walked me out of a dunk tank, drove me around in the rain. And now you know the sad, true story, and you've decided I'm your project. Poor, misunderstood Frankie. Poor mean old cook with a heart of gold underneath. If only somebody kind enough came along to dig it out. Her voice didn't rise. That was the worst of it. It stayed level and it cut. I have watched a man's kindness curdle into a chore before. Wyatt. My daddy was kind to my mama for about 2 years after her stroke, and then he wasn't. And I watched every day of it turn, watched it go from love to duty to resentment to a man counting the hours, and I swore I'd die before I'd be that for anybody. I won't be your charity, and I won't be your project. You did a nice thing at a dunk tank, and I let it go too far, and that's on me. But we're done playing house at this counter. Go on home. Shoe your horses. Find some girl your own age who doesn't come with a fire and a brother and a debt and 11 years of a whole town's hate. You're 29. You've got time to make a clean start. Don't spend it patching a woman who's already this far gone. I should have fought her right there. I've replayed it 100 times, and every time I know I should have planted my feet in that empty diner and refused to be pushed. But I was 29, and I'd been left before by a woman who did her math and decided I wasn't in the answer, and Frankie's speech landed in the exact bruise Nora and the airport had left, and some coward reflex in me mistook her fear for a decision and mistook retreat for respect. That's the trap decent men fall into. We've got a coward's move built right into the decency, and we call it giving somebody space. I picked up my hat. I said, I don't think you're a project, Frankie. And she said, then you're not paying attention, and turned back to her cold griddle. And I walked out into the rain and let the door close. And I did not go back the next morning. And that was the worst mistake of my life, and it lasted 3 weeks. The 3 weeks went gray. I won't dress it up, because the whole point is that nothing happens in the gray. That's how you know it's the real kind. I shod horses. I banked the forge and let it die and banked it again. I ate at the gas station, whose coffee is in fact battery acid. She was right about that too. The tin lunch stopped. I hadn't understood how much of my day was built around that dented pail until there wasn't one. Until noon came at the Harjit place and there was nothing but a vending machine and the memory of a sandwich built like a lifeboat. And every morning I drove past the hen house on the fair road and saw the light on and saw, through the fogged window, one empty stool at the end of the counter that nobody sat on. And I knew whose it was, and I kept driving, and I called that respect. The yellow ball sat on my forge windowsill. Some nights I picked it up and turned it over. The little grin of red stitching, 40 balls I never threw. And I thought about the one thing I'd said that was true. I don't think you're a project, and how I'd said it, and then walked out and proved I was a liar by leaving. She came to the forge on the 22nd night. I know it was the 22nd because I'd been counting them the way you count anything you're too much of a coward to end. It was raining, hard, the kind that comes over the ridge and settles in for the night, and I had the forge fire up late because I couldn't sleep, and a coal fire is better company than a ceiling. I was drawing out a bar for nothing in particular, just to hear the hammer, when headlights swung across the open barn door and a car I knew, the rusted-out sedan, the one the town called cheap, pulled up in the mud, and Frankie Doyle got out into the rain in her canvas coat and stood at the edge of the light my fire threw, not coming in, the water running off her, and I set the hammer down and my heart went up into my throat like a struck spark. You've got a lot of nerve, she said, letting a fire go to waste this late. Frankie. I drove out here to yell at you, she said, and her voice wasn't level anymore. It was cracking at the edges, and she was letting it, standing in the rain and letting it. Tuggle told me you look like death warmed over. Roy, the tenant farmer, asked me was the young farrier sick, said you shot his mule and didn't say 10 words. And Carla Prewitt, God help me, Carla Prewitt said to me at the feed store, she said, what'd you do to run that nice young man off? Like it was a foregone thing that I'd done it, that I'd ruined it. That, of course, sour Frankie couldn't keep one good thing. She took a step into the light. And the thing is, Wyatt, she's right. I did do it. I said all that ugly stuff to run you off, and it worked. It worked in about 4 seconds. And I have spent 3 weeks finding out that getting exactly what I asked for is the worst thing that ever happened to me. I came around the anvil. I didn't reach for her. I've learned that much. You don't reach for a thing that's decided whether to bolt. You let it come. Come in out of the rain, I said. No, she stayed where she was, half in the firelight, streaming. I have to say it out here where it costs me something, or I'll never say it at all. I don't know how to do this. I want you to understand that. I'm 31 years old, and I have never once in my life asked a person to want me, because I don't know how. Because the one time I needed somebody, they'd have had to go to prison for me, and I couldn't let them. So I decided I'd just not need, not want, not ask, cook past needs so I'd never have to feel it. And it worked for 11 years, and then a horseman bought 40 balls and wouldn't throw a single one, and it stopped working. Her jaw was going. I don't know how to be wanted. Wyatt. I only know how to be put up with. I know how to be needed, and I know how to be tolerated, and I know how to be the one who fixes it and pays for it and never says a word. And I do not know the other thing, the thing where somebody just wants you in the room. It scares me worse than the fire did. And I came out here in the rain to ask you for it anyway, because being scared of it turns out to be a whole lot better than not having it. And I only just now found that out, and I hate it, and here I am. That was the bravest thing I have ever watched anybody do, and she did it in the mud in the rain at 11 at night. Armored to seem brave enough to ask. She'd walked the whole road. I went inside for 1 second. She flinched like I was leaving, and I said, 1 second, and I came back with the yellow ball off the windowsill. I walked out to her in the rain, my fire hissing behind me where the drops came in the door, and I put that soft yellow softball into her wet hand and closed her fingers around it. I kept one, I said, that day, out of the 40. It rolled under the table and I put it in my pocket, and I've had it on that sill ever since, and I didn't know why until right now. I bought 40 balls to keep the whole town from throwing one at you, Frankie. And then 3 weeks ago I threw the last one myself. I walked out that door and I threw it, and I've hated myself every morning since, driving past a stool nobody sits on. I closed both my hands around her one. So I'm giving it back. There. Now nobody's got a ball to throw at you. Not the town. Not me. Especially not me. She looked down at the ball in her fist, and her whole face came apart. Finally, 3 weeks and 11 years of it, and she didn't hide it. She let me see it in the rain and the firelight. Stay, I said, not because the town forgives you. They don't even know yet what there is to forgive, and we're going to fix that. But that's not why. Stay because I want you here. Not the ghost account, not the best cook in 3 counties. Not a project and not a charity and not a woman I feel sorry for. I have never once felt sorry for you. I felt about 10 other things, and not one of them was that. I want you. In the room. On the days you're not fixing anybody or feeding anybody or paying anybody back, especially those days, the empty ones, I want you in those too. And I'm done being brave about this by myself. I've been standing at that dunk tank alone for 3 weeks holding a coat open like a fool. Come down out of the tank, Frankie. I'm done being brave alone. She stepped in under the barn roof out of the rain. Finally, both of us dripping in the orange light of the coal fire, and she put her free hand flat against my chest the way I'd wanted her to for a year. And she looked up at me with the ball still gripped in the other fist, and she said, "You're going to be difficult to get rid of, aren't you?" Impossible, I said. Impossible's different from hard. Hard wears you out. Where'd you learn that? Off you. You said it over a skillet in October and thought I wasn't listening. And Frankie Doyle laughed. The real one. The road that hadn't been driven one. Cracking up in the middle. In the rain. In my forge. And I put my hand at her wet jaw and I kissed her. Once. The way you kiss somebody you plan to be kissing for the rest of your life. Unhurried. Sure, the coal fire ticking beside us and the rain coming down on the barn roof loud as a whole town finally applauding. The right thing. Just the once. Some things you don't rush even when you've waited too long already. The rest I can tell you quick. The way she'd want it told. Sideways and without a fuss. We cleared her name, but we did it her way. Which is to say we did it with a ledger and not a speech. The new Grange Hall was finished that spring. Built. Though most of the town still didn't know it, in large part with 11 years of a ghost's Christmas envelopes, and the Fair Board planned a dedication, and Carla Prewitt was going to give a speech about the resilience of the community. I asked Frankie for one thing, the only thing I ever pushed her on, and it took Tuggle and me and a long night to talk her into it. Her brother Dell drove down from Ohio. I met him for the first time on the Grange steps, a lean, sober man of 27 with his sister's eyes and his sister's flat, brave way of standing. And he'd been wanting to do this for 10 years, and she'd never let him. And when she finally did, he stood up in front of that dedication crowd and told them the truth. All of it. That he'd been drunk in 17 and knocked the friars over. That his sister had sent him home and taken the blame to keep him out of prison. that she'd spent every dollar since quietly rebuilding the town that hated her for it. And then I got up, because Frankie wouldn't, and I read the ledger. Tuggle had kept it, all 11 years, the feed tabs and the bleachers and the barn roof and the scholarships, adding it up as it went, and I read the number out loud, and there was a sound in that new hall that I will hear on my deathbed, the sound of a whole town realizing at once that the meanest woman in the county had been the kindest and had let them hate her for it rather than be caught being good. Carla Prewitt cried. I'll give her that. She found Frankie afterward and couldn't get a word out, just stood there, and Frankie, because this is who she actually is, under all of it, said, "Oh, sit down, Carla, before you fall down, and somebody get this woman a plate. I made ham." She fed them. Of course she fed them. She'd been feeding them the whole time. They wanted to put her name on the new Grange, big, on a banner. She wouldn't have it. What she allowed, what I forged myself, in the barn, over a week of nights, was a small brass plaque by the front door, and mounted above it, cleaned but not hidden, the scorch left honest on it, the one-strap hinge she'd pulled from the old hall the night it burned. The plaque doesn't have her name. It says, in letters I cut by hand, "This door hung on the old hall and will hang on this one, saved from the fire, like the rest of us." And under that, small, the way she does everything that matters, kept by a friend of the fair. Everybody knows now who the friend was. Nobody says it out loud. That's how she wanted it, and she earned the right to want it. We married in the forge in September, a year almost to the day from the dunk tank. Not many people, Dell and Tuggle, and Roy the tenant farmer who insisted on shoeing in a borrowed suit, and a handful of fair folk who'd come around. I banked the fire up bright. Frankie cooked, because she would no more sit still at her own wedding than fly, and she made cornbread in her mama's skillet, the 8-inch, black as a moonless night, and it was the best thing anybody there had ever eaten, and she knew it. She wore no white. She wore a green dress and her hair down for the first time I'd ever seen it. And when the little crowd went quiet, I did the one thing I'd been saving up since a folding coat and 40 yellow balls, and I kissed her by the anvil, and the whole room did the lean, that shift people make when they think they're about to watch something. Except this time, what they got to watch was the thing they'd finally learned to root for. That was 3 years back. We run the shoeing, and she runs the hen house, and the fair board put the football coach back in the dunk tank where he belongs, and if anybody ever again in Hallam County makes a sign about anybody, they'll answer to a farrier and a cook, and they know it. Dell calls every Sunday. The Grange stands, and the honest hinge hangs on it. And on the windowsill over my forge, where a soft yellow softball sat by itself for a year, there sit now 2 mugs, a chipped white one that says hen house, and a cheap one with a cartoon horse and the words where the Commonwealth trades, and every morning before the fire's up, we drink our coffee out of them, and they don't match, and they never will, and I've come to believe that's the whole secret. Of the good ones. The real thing never matches. It never looks like much from across the room. It's a mean cook and a tired farrier and a ball nobody threw. And if you've got the sense to keep it before, you know why you're keeping it, it'll throw heat edge to edge for the rest of your life, like cast iron brought back right. So here's what I want to ask you, wherever you're sitting tonight. Has this town ever handed you a story about somebody? The mean one, the cheap one, the sour one, the one everybody's already decided about? And were you ever there on the day the story turned out to be a coat somebody had been holding over a hurt for years? Or have you been that one? The one who'd rather be hated with the truth in your pocket than caught being good? Tell me down in the comments. I read them in the morning, at the counter, out of the ugly mug. And if this one warmed you up any, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll keep the fire banked for you. Come knock twice. There's always a plate.